This is a wonderful, bubbly, confident, independent woman, and she's missing.
Jamie Laiaddee disappeared. Doesn't make any sense. She's a college graduate from the University of Michigan, respected within her community. People of her background and stature don't just come up missing for 10 weeks and nobody hears from them.
How can one of my best friends have been missing for 10 weeks? How did it come to this, that she could be gone so long and nobody reported it?
I couldn't believe that it had been that long, that nobody had noticed. It was absolute craziness.
Well, Phoenix in the metropolitan area is the 6th largest city in the country. It's a big valley, and it's surrounded by desert on all 4 sides.
I believe Jamie Laiaddee came to Arizona to establish her own identity.
Jamie was a very private person. She kept to herself. She wasn't close with her family.
She just kind of had a, don't ask me about my parents kind of thing.
So the only person that saw her on a daily basis was her live-in boyfriend, Bryan Stewart.
Jamie and I dated for nearly 3 years. She's always refused to talk about her past or her family. Every time that Jamie saw her parents, she was terrified.
It was a very different case than just about everything else that we work. There was no blood. There was no body. There was no evidence of a crime scene. There's no smoking gun in this case, but there is a lot of burning matchsticks.
Jamie's lost. We don't know where she is, and it's really sad.
She was a good person, and she didn't deserve this.
I believe Jamie was murdered because there's no clear explanation as to where she is now, what happened to her, and why.
Jamie Laiaddee is alive. She took $100,000 of Daddy's money, and she left the state of Arizona.
He's a very convincing liar.
Bring it on. I know she's alive.
I'm Erin Moriarty. Tonight on 48 Hours, the stranger beside me. When Jamie Laiaddee disappeared in March of 2010, none of her closest friends noticed for weeks. The truth is, Jamie had been fading from their lives for nearly 2 years.
After your friend stops making an effort, you kind of stop too. But I never thought Jamie would have been the one to stop making an effort.
It was completely out of character for the sweet California girl they all met as freshmen at the University of Michigan.
She was a good friend. We were a support network for each other.
Gwyneth Newman, Sheila Dubes, and Jennifer Langoot say they quickly formed a lasting bond with Jamie.
It's kind of like we had this rock. We had this family of friends that we were so connected with. And I remember leaving Michigan. It was just so reassuring that you were just a phone call away from feeling like you belong somewhere again.
They call themselves the 516 Girls, referring to the address of a house they shared in Ann Arbor their senior year, and where they were passionate supporters of Michigan's Big Ten football team.
We were obsessed with U of M football.
No one was a greater booster than Jamie.
I think I always picture her in my mind on football Saturdays, charging out to the stadium.
Sheila says that she and Jamie had a special connection.
We were both from immigrant families.
And both were under heavy pressure to succeed.
I think our fathers were kind of the same. They put a lot of pressure on us to do really well in school, but I think she just wanted to make it on her own.
Vani and Jamie Laiaddee came to the U.S. from Thailand in search of a better life. They admit they pushed Jamie to go to medical school.
You think that because you were pushing her to go back to school,
Right.
she might have pulled away a bit?
She said, she's a big girl.
After graduation, Jamie landed in Phoenix, Arizona. The Big Valley was booming, the perfect place to blend in and make her own way. She eventually found a high-paying job selling medical supplies. And while it consumed her time, she managed to maintain her now long-distance friendships.
We emailed each other a lot. Even though we all ended up in different locations, I think we still look to each other for support. But the weddings were the big thing that kind of kept us together.
But far away in Arizona, Jamie was lonely, so she joined a local University of Michigan alum club, where she found friends who shared her deep love of Michigan football. Marlena Buffa was the group's president.
She was enthusiastic, but still she was reserved and quiet.
But when she caught the eye of a handsome young fellow Michigan fan, Jamie found romance.
She was hot. I mean, how else do you put it?
Bryan Stewart says the attraction was immediate.
She had a really good smile and really got enthusiastic about the football games and would jump up and cheer and would sing with the fight song.
They started dating in the fall of 2007. About a year later, Bryan moved into the home that Jamie owned in the trendy Phoenix suburb of Chandler. She was the breadwinner, making well over $100,000 a year. Bryan, a personal trainer, made much less.
Did she pay most of the bills?
Most of the big ones, yeah. But it's not like I was dependent upon her.
Did you love Jamie?
I still love Jamie. You know, I just want Jamie to be happy. It's hard because I don't know if Jamie knows what it takes to make her happy.
In August 2009, Jamie suffered a crushing setback. When the economy took a big downturn, she lost the thing she valued most, her high-powered job.
Her career had been going so well for so long, and I think this was a pretty major blow to her.
She searched for months in Arizona, Florida, New Jersey, but Jamie couldn't find another job. When the real estate crash hit Chandler and her property value plunged, Bryan says she became despondent and even more withdrawn.
You know, it was like when it rains, it pours. For Jamie, it was pouring.
Bryan says all of it took a toll on their relationship, so he rented an apartment in Scottsdale and planned to break things off. And on the night of March 17th, he said, he was going to tell Jamie he was moving out. Instead, he says, she surprised him.
She came in, asked me to take a week off from work, and she's like, we're gonna go to Denver, we're gonna get a house. You know, I've got a job offer up there. It's time to go, I wanna get out of this state. Basically, I told her no. I'm not leaving Arizona, I'm not gonna marry you.
Bryan admits Jamie was upset and that they argued. Still, he says that when they went to bed, things had settled down. At the crack of dawn the next morning, Bryan left for work.
She was laying in bed, and I gave her a kiss, told her I loved her, and got in the truck and drove to work.
But later that morning, Bryan emailed Marlena Buffa and told her a different story.
And said, Jamie dumped me, she moved to Colorado.
Did that surprise you at all?
No. I thought good for her.
Did he seem upset?
A little bit. He was more angry that she left him alone.
At any point, did it even cross your mind that something could have happened to Jamie?
No. I knew she had means. If she wants to pick up and leave, good for her.
That day, and for weeks to come, no one realized that Jamie had disappeared.
When is the last time you saw Jamie?
Physically saw her, 3:15 a.m., March 18th, 2010.
There she is.
Jamie Laiaddee had always been fiercely private, but by the summer of 2009, she was practically reclusive, cutting herself off from nearly everyone except her live-in boyfriend, Bryan Stewart.
We never had anybody over for dinner. We never had any parties. Nobody came over to watch television or to just hang out.
Why not?
So, one of the great mysteries. I don't know.
Even Jamie's parents say she was more distant than ever.
My husband said, well, you know, she's a busy girl. Don't bother her.
That's why it took nearly 3 months for anyone to notice that Jamie was missing.
I think people were just respecting her privacy and her space, and that was unfortunate.
Then on May 28th, Marlena got a call from Bryan.
He said, you know, I'm starting to get worried about Jamie.
Marlena was also worried, so she and another member of the Michigan Alum Club called a private investigator, Burke Files. Files did a background check on Bryan and found nothing suspicious, although one thing did stand out. About 10 years earlier, at 2 different addresses in Michigan, Bryan had lived with a man named Rick Valentini.
It could be a roommate. It could be a close friend. It could be a relative.
And then Burke Files went on to trace Jamie's credit to see where she was now living and working. He came up empty.
And nothing. There was no activity at all. Nothing.
Jamie had disappeared into thin air. So Files sounded the alarm. Marlena urged Bryan to call Jamie's parents, who then called the police.
I immediately thought something was wrong. People of her background and stature don't just come up missing for 10 weeks and nobody hears from them.
That afternoon, Chandler police got a warrant to search Jamie's home and started calling Bryan, but he seemed to be ignoring them.
To me, that was alarming. It just showed a lack of concern.
Later that same night, when detectives were searching for Jamie's missing Ford Escape, they found it in Scottsdale, with Bryan behind the wheel.
The detective said, well, I'm here in regards to your girlfriend. And the first thing he did was say, my ex-girlfriend.
The detective felt that Bryan was being evasive and seemed nervous. When Bryan asked to use the bathroom in his own apartment, the answer was no.
We didn't want to risk losing any evidence if there was some in there. As luck would have it, he had a warrant for his arrest for driving on a suspended license for a traffic offense.
Yeah.
So the detective used that warrant to take Bryan into custody.
Bryan?
Yes.
Hey, I'm Nate Moffitt. How are you, man? It's B-R-Y-A-N, right?
Yes.
Last name is?
Stewart.
Detective Moffitt interrogated Bryan.
How long have you and Jamie been dating?
Give or take 3 years.
Okay. When did you guys move in together?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay. Were you cheating on Jamie at all before?
No.
While Detective Spielman searched Jamie's home for clues.
Walk me through what happened around March.
It was simple, really. She hated everything about the state. She wanted out. Now, she'd been up there for interviews. I suspected that she would get the Denver offer.
So, you know, he's saying she went to Colorado, yet all of her suitcases are there and her passport's there. All these things that she would need to travel are there at the house.
But Jamie's wallet and driver's license were missing.
I was concerned, but the possibility did exist that, you know, she just left and she doesn't want to be found.
But at Chandler PD, Moffitt smelled a rat and started pressing Bryan.
Did you hurt Jamie? Okay. Did you have anything to do with her disappearance? You have nothing to hide?
No,
But things just didn't add up for Moffitt. There were just too many inconsistencies. Bryan gave a birth date to the arresting officer, which didn't match the date on his Arizona ID.
I have no freaking clues sitting in front of me. And it's extremely uneasy for me as I'm investigating a case of this magnitude.
Moffitt had no idea how right he was until the next day, when Bryan was in a jail cell and detectives were searching his apartment.
Well, we were searching his new residence. We located a manila envelope with a Michigan driver's license in the name of Rick Valentini. And that picture was Bryan Stewart.
You're not really Bryan Stewart at all, are you?
On the night of May 29, 2010, as he interrogated Bryan Stewart about his missing girlfriend, Jamie Laiaddee, Detective Moffat knew that Bryan wasn't telling the truth.
I mean, you're talking a woman who's been gone for 2 months now. And I have a person in front of me that has different social security numbers, a couple of different dates of birth.
You're not really Bryan Stewart at all, are you?
To me, I am.
But not legally, are you?
Well, legally, I'm not anything.
Actually, legally, Bryan is Rick Valentini. Remember the roommate that private investigator Burke Files noticed in Bryan Stewart's credit history? Well, there was no roommate, just this guy, Rick Valentini, who was preparing to change his identity.
In our modern world with the databases, you just can't turn on a new name, a new taxpayer ID number, a social security number. You have to age it, you have to season it.
In October 2001, when the name Bryan Stewart had enough of a credit history, Rick Valentini disappeared from Michigan. Days later, a man named Bryan became a resident of Phoenix.
Driving from Michigan to Arizona, that's all I did. Bryan Stewart, Bryan Stewart, Bryan Stewart, Bryan Stewart. I was always saying, listening for Bryan Stewart, because it's a new name.
A new name and a new man, according to Rick. The kind of man he always wanted to be. And he insists that whether legal or not, he is now Bryan Stewart, and would only agree to an interview if we would use that name.
And if you don't want to accept that, I don't want you around, I don't want you in my life.
Why not change your name legally? Why go to the trouble of forging a birth certificate?
Well, it was my understanding that to change your name legally would take years.
Bryan claims he wasn't running from the law, just leaving behind what he describes as a tragic childhood.
Everybody takes their name for granted. Your name is the very core essence of who you are, of what you are. And you find out that it's all a lie. And then you find out that your own father doesn't even know you exist because your own mother didn't bother to tell him.
His mother was 18 when he was born. His real father reportedly walked away.
He just wasn't loved. Just didn't have love. That's why he loved us, because we loved him.
His Aunt Donna says she believes he was physically and emotionally abused.
I think the other children were too, but not like him. He always knew there was something different about him, and he didn't know what.
Do you think that he created this different name, different persona because he just didn't want to be who he was?
Exactly, exactly.
But when detectives started looking into Rick Valentini's background, this is what else they found: 3 ex-wives and 2 daughters.
Hello?
Hi, is this Cynthia?
This is.
Hi, Cynthia. Detective Dave Selvage from Chandler Police Department.
One of his exes told Chandler Police she thinks Rick is just a deadbeat dad on the run.
He owed, from what I understand, quite a bit of back child support from Wendy, his first wife.
His oldest daughter, Amy, was a baby when he left.
He never called, never talked to me, never contacted me.
When your mom finally told you about your dad, what did she say about him? What kind of guy he was?
A really bad guy, a liar. She told me that he always lied all the time. He lied about lots of things.
In Phoenix, his whole life was a lie. He told everyone, including Jamie, that his parents were killed by a drunk driver. He pretended to be 8 years younger than he is and boasted a hero's military record that was complete fiction.
When you talked to Detective Moffat, when he sat you down, he asked you about your military record. And you said you'd been to Iraq and Afghanistan. You hadn't, had you? No, you lied.
You
lied.
Yeah.
Rick Valentini, a.k.a. Bryan Stewart, was an enlisted man, but he was dishonorably discharged after going AWOL and stabbing 2 military officers in the hand and leg. He served 2 years in a military prison. He never mentioned that to anyone either.
Freeze it. You tell a lot of stories, though, don't you?
I have a lot of stories to tell.
But you tell a lot of lies.
Lies mixed in with the truth.
Like the lie that ultimately made Jamie Laiaddee trust Bryan with her life.
You never actually went to the University of Michigan, did you?
No.
But you let people think you did.
Sure.
Why?
It was just a tie-in to my home state, and it was just part of the pride that I had. I've been a Michigan fan since I was a little boy.
He was right in there, and boy, he was a Michigan man.
And it wasn't just that fanaticism that conned the alumni group in Phoenix for 4 years. Bryan also had a fake diploma.
He's fooled all of us. We're talking hundreds of people here and 20 or so board members, many of them attorneys and judges.
News of Jamie's boyfriend's double life went viral and made her disappearance even more alarming.
This doesn't happen to your friends.
No.
This does not happen to you people you went to college with that you call your sister. This doesn't happen to your family. You don't have friends who meet people who have double identities.
Did you begin to think that maybe Jamie was dead?
Yes.
And did you think he might have killed her? Did you kill Jamie?
No. I've never killed anybody in my life. Not ever.
Did you two fight that night? Were
No.
you angry with her?
No. She told me that she was going to be leaving the next day.
And where was she going?
It was my impression, Denver.
But detectives who had already discovered several suitcases in Jamie's home couldn't find any evidence of Jamie ever leaving for or arriving in Denver. Bryan says that's because Jamie didn't want to be found.
I taught Jamie how to create a whole new life for herself. That included a new identification, a whole new persona, a whole new way of looking at things.
Are you saying that you helped Jamie change her identity?
Yeah, I showed her how to do it. The only thing that she ever lived for was to be free of her family. She wanted to be on her own.
He's too smart. Why would he have stayed there for 10 weeks? If he killed her, why wouldn't he have just left? He'd done it before, why wouldn't he do it again?
Isn't it possible that Jamie's doing the same thing that Bryan did, just vanished the same way, and no one's been able to track her down?
Are you asking me today if I believe that's possible? Absolutely not. I wholeheartedly believe Bryan Stewart, Rick Valentini, whoever you want to call him, murdered Jamie Laiaddee on the night of March 17th.
But a year and a half after Jamie disappeared, there is still no body, no blood, no sign of a struggle, no physical evidence of a murder.
We just didn't have what you would consider a traditional crime scene. So we went with more of a virtual crime scene.
They started investigating the digital record of Jamie's life. And this little white envelope contained several pieces of the puzzle. Prosecutor Juan Martinez says it was enough to convince him that Bryan Stewart should be charged with murder.
This is a really telling piece of evidence. Oh my gosh. In this many pieces.
In June 2010, Bryan Stewart was charged with fraud for forging a new birth certificate and changing his name illegally.
If you think using the name Bryan Stewart is fraudulent, hey, we're going to fight it out in court.
But while detectives suspected he was responsible for the disappearance and death of his girlfriend, Jamie Laiaddee, they couldn't charge him with her murder.
What do the two of you think happened that night?
I think they had a fight.
But wouldn't there be some sign of that in her home?
Not necessarily. I mean, strangulation or suffocation or anything like that, there's going to be virtually no blood.
With no physical evidence, they would have to build a strong circumstantial case to prove that Jamie was dead and Bryan was the one who killed her.
We literally dissected all of Jamie's financial affairs, all of her accounts, all of the transactions, his email, her email.
What they saw was a very responsible woman.
I mean, she was a person that stayed up on her emails, she returned phone calls, she paid all of her bills on time until March 17th, then she didn't do any of those things.
For the next 3 months, detectives realized that the only person who appeared to be using Jamie's credit cards was Bryan Stewart.
The only transactions on one of Jamie's accounts were internet purchases and dating websites.
He used her cards to meet other women?
That's right. Basically, he said the same thing. He was a graduate of the University of Michigan, never been married, didn't know if he wanted kids or not.
That's nervy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty nervy.
And pretty insensitive, too, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, a little, because, well, let me explain.
You used her credit cards to go on dating sites to meet other women.
Well, you know what? Look, Jamie was leaving.
But nothing alarmed Prosecutor Martinez more than what detectives found when they searched Bryan's apartment in Scottsdale.
Her wallet was lying on his desk. There was a number of her credit cards there on the desk. And then on the back filing cabinet was her personal telephone that he said she had with her.
So was this small white envelope. And when police got a warrant to open it, they found pieces of cut-up ID and credit cards. When they put them together, they had Jamie Laiaddee's driver's license, her Michigan University alum card, and several credit cards.
Why did you cut up her driver's license?
I didn't cut them up.
Bryan claims it was Jamie who cut up the cards after she changed her identity and ran away. But when Chandler police tested the envelope to see who sealed it, the DNA belonged to Bryan.
Even when you had that envelope, it still took a year before you brought murder charges against him.
We were tying up all the loose ends. When you don't have a body, you have to be very careful because you only get one chance.
That chance came when an inmate at the jail where Bryan was being held agreed to testify that Bryan had confessed to killing Jamie.
He went to this particular individual and said, "Do you think that they can charge me if they can't find the body?"
On March 24, 2011, a grand jury indicted Bryan on charges of second-degree murder of his girlfriend, Jamie Laiaddee. He was also charged with fraud for using Jamie's credit cards without her permission.
Who is technically, legally on trial here?
An individual by the name of Rick Valentini, also known as Bryan Stewart.
But isn't this a little odd? Because even through the trial, you're calling him Bryan Stewart.
That's the name that he preferred. I'll use whatever name he wants to convict him.
In October of 2011, Rick Wayne Valentini, aka Bryan Stewart, went on trial.
State's first witness.
The first witness to testify for the state was Andrea Aardsma.
What does your husband do for a living?
He is a professional baseball player.
Back in 2010, she and her husband David, then ace pitcher for the Seattle Mariners, were in Scottsdale during the off-season. Andrea worked out at Gold's Gym 5 days a week, and her personal trainer was Bryan.
And did he tell you whether or not he had a girlfriend?
Yes, he had a girlfriend.
And did he tell you her name?
Jamie.
Andrea testified that for months before Jamie disappeared, Bryan had complained about his souring relationship and what he really thought of his girlfriend.
Whiny, naggy, bitch, sugar mama, nothing positive at all.
I don't know if he just thought I was a good listener or if he really did think that I was stupid and that he could tell me all these things and nothing would come of it.
In one of the trial's most disturbing moments, Andrea stood up and reenacted Bryan sharing his nickname for Jamie.
Jamie the Gut, Jamie the Gut. And I'm like, man, like if you hate her so much, just break up with her.
The jury also heard from Jamie's parents.
Have you received any emails from her?
No.
Has she shown up at your house?
No.
Have you been hiding her just so that Mr. Stewart won't find her?
No.
But some of the most significant testimony revealed that Jamie had found a new job. And not in Denver, but right here in Phoenix.
She's very excited about her new job, and we're looking forward to working together on March 18th.
David Beauchamp, a lawyer and friend, testified that he helped Jamie negotiate the contract for that job. What's more, he saw Jamie 2 days before she disappeared and testified that he saw bruises.
She was exhibiting many of the characteristics of a battered woman, and she absolutely broke down.
On day 7 of the state's case,
Thank you. Please be seated.
the jailhouse snitch took the stand.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
At his request, the judge ordered us not to reveal his identity. He also got a deal for testifying. A 2-year sentence for fraud was reduced to 1.
He was very agitated, talking about how the police know that I killed her, that he needed to get it off his chest.
By the time the state rested, Prosecutor Martinez and Detective Nate Moffat were sure they would get a conviction on the fraudulent schemes charge. But had they convinced the jury that Bryan had committed murder?
I think a lot of people would have a hard time convicting with no body. We really had to be careful and listen to both sides.
Knowing his life was on the line, Bryan was about to do something that would shock the entire courtroom.
Were you expecting the defendant to take the stand?
I wasn't.
Absolutely not.
But I was glad that he did.
Pieces of a driver's license and credit cards. A closet filled with shoes and purses. The evidence at trial is a daily reminder of what Jamie Laiaddee's parents have lost.
So hard every time they mention her name. It's hurt me so much that I'm thinking that I'm not going to see her anymore then.
And as the defense begins, Jamie's mother has one wish.
The whole time I've been praying that I hope he take the stand.
Why?
Because then they can see through him.
Her prayer is granted, despite his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and very much against his lawyer and most any lawyer's advice.
Stand up, raise your right hand.
Bryan Stewart boldly and defiantly takes the stand.
I do. I am the only human being who knows what happened. I'm the only human being who knows why things happened, when they happened.
What was your relationship like?
It was, I would say, 95% great.
Did you argue?
No, not really.
He appears confident and relaxed, but after all, it is his lawyer asking the questions.
Did you kill Jamie to use her credit cards?
Absolutely not.
Did you have general permission to use her credit cards?
Yes.
Bryan insists he didn't need to steal from Jamie.
Why do you feel that you had permission to use the cards?
Even from our first date, it was literally an instruction to use them.
And then he drops a bombshell, claiming that long after Jamie disappeared, she was still in Phoenix and would visit the house they shared and his new condo when Bryan wasn't around.
Because I would get back to my condo and things would be moved around or things would be left behind.
Okay. Now, how did she get into your apartment?
She had a key.
But that's not all. He also claims he continued to communicate with Jamie long after that morning in March 2010 when she vanished.
How did she communicate with you?
Email and telephone.
Okay.
You have told people that if you had a computer, you could find her. I've got a computer here. You want to try? Got my iPad here. How would you find her?
I would have to look on mine.
I mean, if I got this whole thing set up, could you? I mean, if you could
No, because
find her...
I need to get into my computer because there's a special email site that we were working through.
You must know, Bryan, that sounds a little crazy that you would have given this information to your attorneys and they wouldn't go looking for the one person who could save you from going to prison for life.
I told them that, and I never heard anything.
Did you murder Jamie Laiaddee?
No. Jamie Laiaddee is alive.
She would just let you go on trial for murder, go to prison for the rest of your life.
I don't know. I don't think either one of us ever expected it to get this far.
Would you be at all surprised if I told you that she was about to walk through that door?
No.
But prosecutor Juan Martinez wasn't buying any of it.
You didn't actually talk to her in that condo, did you?
No.
You have not seen her at any time, and she hasn't walked in now, right?
Right.
And she won't walk in because you killed her, right?
Wrong.
I don't have anything else, thank you.
One day before Thanksgiving 2011, more than a year and a half after Jamie Laiaddee disappeared, the prosecution and defense rested after presenting two very different stories. It was now up to the jury to decide, and foreman Leon Lead was worried.
As we were moving to deliberation, I wondered how difficult of a decision this is going to be for the 12 of us, knowing that there's no body.
But just 4 hours later, the jury returned with a verdict.
Did any of you look at him when you walked in?
No, I did not.
No.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Bryan Stewart was reassured by deputy sheriffs guarding him.
Oh, yeah. They're like, yeah, you're good. Anytime a jury comes back that quick. And I was like, okay, well, wow, all right, that's pretty good.
We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled action upon our oaths as to count 1, second-degree murder, do find the defendant guilty.
Guilty. Jamie's parents were overcome.
Are these your true verdicts? So say you want to...
Guilty, that's all I heard, and I lost it. I was so happy.
And then there was more.
As to count 2, fraudulent schemes and artifices, do find the defendant guilty. Signed foreperson.
Bryan Stewart couldn't believe his ears.
I just sat there. Like, to me, my life was over with. I just couldn't understand. You know? I mean, if I would have killed her, I would have admitted to it.
Do you think Bryan Stewart / Rick Valentini is a dangerous man?
Yes.
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 Absolutely.
No question in your mind?
None.
None at all. The first 10 minutes of his testimony, any doubt I had that he was solely responsible for the murder of Jamie had been sealed at that moment in time.
You've told so many stories, it's hard to believe you.
Let's look at the Army, okay?
No, let's look at what happened to Jamie. That's what really matters.
Jamie took $100,000 and she left the state of Arizona. I've said it for 18 months, I say it now, and I'm gonna say it for the next 18 years.
But investigators say there was no money, and his story is just another lie. And for her friends and family,
I just feel so bad that we weren't there.
the one remaining question may never be answered.
Is it hard because you don't really know where she is? You've never been able to bury her?
That's right. That's right. I still have what they call the receiving blankets of Jamie from the hospital. And I carried it with me all the time. And I intend to use that blanket to carry her home if we find her.
Did you kill Jamie?
No.
Did you two fight that night? Were
No.
you angry with her?
No, I've never killed anybody in my life. Not ever.
Meet Bryan Stewart, also known as Rick Valentini. He was my first killer. What do I mean by that? Well, my name is Judy Rybak, and I'm a longtime 48 Hours producer. Back in 2011, my very first assignment for 48 Hours was to convince the man with two names to do an interview with Erin Moriarty. He agreed under one condition, that we only call him Bryan.
You're not really Bryan Stewart at all, are you?
To me, I am.
But not legally, are you?
Well, legally, I'm not anything. That's the problem.
You're Rick Valentini.
His legal name was Rick, but we all agreed to call him Bryan because he had just been convicted of the second-degree murder of his 32-year-old girlfriend, Jamie Laiaddee, and we wanted to hear his story, even though we knew it was mostly fiction. Actually, he had run away from a life in Michigan. He changed his name illegally, tricked Jamie into believing him, and killed her. Our front row seat to this con man's relationship with the truth taught us so much about how the criminal mind works, things you don't learn in books. I'm excited to be producing and hosting 48 Hours Killer Conversation, and even more excited that Erin Moriarty is here to talk about her masterclass of an interview with my first killer, but definitely not hers, Bryan Stewart. Welcome, Erin. Thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate it. You are the hardest working woman in television, and I know you're taking this time out to be with us is a real gift.
But it's great, Judy, that you're doing Killer Conversation.
So tell me how you prepare for these interviews, because I know you want to get at the truth, but that's not easy, right?
No, because realize that the defendant in this case probably knows the case better than anybody, if they were there or not there, but they know the facts of the case. So you have to go in so prepared. So I think my goal, I think your goal too, when you talk to someone, is to talk with them after, really at the end of the process, after we've read every court document, spoken to everybody involved with the case. That's ideal, because otherwise, you don't know whether that person's telling you the truth or not.
Right. And we do really do our homework going into these things.
You have to.
Yeah. So you asked Bryan, Rick, whatever his name is, why he agreed to sit down with you, and this is what he had to say.
Why are you talking to us today?
I guess to put out the truth, you know? I mean, it really sounds, I don't know how it sounds, but frankly speaking, from 2007 until now, I am the only human being who knows what happened. I'm the only human being who knows why things happened, when they happened.
Well, he's telling the truth on one thing. He's the only living person who knows what happened, because sadly at the time we were doing this interview, Jamie was still missing. And so there was no one to contradict what he said.
Right. He had a blank canvas to tell his story, right? So let's talk about the backstory of this case. In 2010, Jamie was 32 years old. She went missing from her home in Chandler, Arizona. Police couldn't find her or her body. Some people thought she might have picked up and just disappeared, taken off. But once police got involved, almost everyone believed that she was dead, right?
Right. And one of the sad parts of this story is Jamie was a very private person. She didn't share a lot, even with her close friends. So when she first disappeared, nobody really thought that much about it. But then after a few weeks, then they started getting worried. And once it was clear that she was missing, the most obvious person of interest was, of course, Bryan. When the police caught up with him, he was driving her car, he had her IDs, and at trial, the 42-year-old got 54 years behind bars for murder and for fraud.
Right. It's really remarkable. So you do work on a lot of wrongful convictions. How do you know when someone is lying to you?
Well, some people are obvious. They really are. I just interviewed an individual last year who, when he talked to me, he contradicted the evidence. I mean, and he knew it. He didn't even seem to be bothered. But there are other people. Remember, these individuals who are accused of a crime know the case better than anyone. Know the details better than anyone, and sometimes can twist it and make you believe.
Right. Although in this case, it was pretty obvious.
Yes, it was. But also because he contradicted the evidence as well. So
Right. The circumstantial evidence was really strong.
You yourself, I wasn't the only one. I talked to him after you had talked to him. You spent hours on the phone with him and in person. Did you at first think he was telling the truth, or was there a time when you realized this guy's lying?
So I went into this having already read, everything that was available to me. And I had spoken to the cops and the prosecutor. So I kind of knew what the story was. But I sent him a letter, and because that's what we have to do. We have to send them a letter, set up an account for them to call us. And he slowly started calling me. And, at first it was very, surface conversation. And then we started digging into his case a little bit more. And I spent so many hours. I think he called me every day for a while because he was bored, right? He was bored and he was testing me. And then I went to Phoenix to sit through his entire trial, and I would visit him once a week. Arpaio, Sheriff Arpaio would let me visit him once a week. And I remember the first time I went to visit him, they left me in a room with him. I mean, he was shackled and there was someone in the room with us, but I was in there for 4 hours with him. And he just told his whole story. And I remember thinking, I have to go back to the hotel and make notes so I don't forget anything. But then every week I heard the same thing over and over and over again. So at some point, without actually rolling my eyes back in my head, my eyes were rolling back in my head.
Kind of sad that someone that smart and who could have had a decent life would run cons the way he did. He was a very, very troubled person.
Yeah. So let's talk about, who he was before this.
Well, we know now that this was actually a surprising detail, that he had 3 ex-wives, I believe, because he seemed pretty young to me, in his 40s. Turned out he was a little older than what he said he was, but 3 ex-wives, and what one of his ex-wives said was that he was just running away from paying the debt he had for child support. But what I think is, he was really running not just from the fact he owed money, but from his life, because I interviewed one of his daughters And it was a very sad conversation. She never heard from him. He had no interest in her life. So he was running away from everything in Michigan, debt and the people that had been in his life in Michigan.
Right. He wanted to start over. So it wasn't easy for Rick to change his name to Bryan illegally. He literally had to make a whole new person. But he makes it sound like it was no big deal.
How long does it take to change your identity? Takes a while, doesn't it?
Year and a half, yeah. So, I mean, it depends.
But why not? Why not change your name legally? Just do it legally. Why go to the trouble of forging a birth certificate?
Well, it was my understanding that to change your name legally would take years.
That's actually not true. It's not easy, but it doesn't take years. In Michigan and Arizona, it would have only taken 4 to 6 months. So what he did was much harder.
So he changed his identity post 9/11 when authorities were really trying to clamp down on fake IDs, and they were really worried about airport security. He used somebody else's Social Security number, forged a new birth certificate, made himself 8 years younger. I wish I could do the
Why
same
not,
thing.
right?
Yes. He took in a roommate. I hope people can see I'm using quotation marks, those air quotation marks. Bryan Stewart. And about a year later, Bryan Stewart, who shared the same address as Rick, had a credit score, a birth certificate, and other ID and credit cards. And so it wasn't too tough for Rick Valentini to slip into the persona of Bryan.
Right. So in October 2001, Rick Valentini disappeared from Michigan and headed to Arizona.
When I left Michigan, driving from Michigan to Arizona, that's all I did. Bryan Stewart, Bryan Stewart, Bryan Stewart, Bryan Stewart. I was always saying, listening for Bryan Stewart, because it's a new name. The whole point of coming to Arizona was not to be a burden. I wanted to be my own person. I wanted to be free. I wanted to, at some point, to go back to my family on my terms, to say, it doesn't matter what happened in the past. It doesn't matter the mistakes that were made or all this. Look, I'm successful and I've done it and I'm happy. And I've found love and joy in my life, and I actually help people. And and I love doing what I do.
So the scary thing is that anyone who did a background check on Bryan Stewart found nothing. He was clean, right? So he actually got a job.
Yeah, he was a personal trainer at Gold's Gym in Scottsdale, and I guess that's what he meant when he says that he was helping people and that he loved it, and he was doing well.
Right. And again, the sad thing is, okay, so you're starting over again, and he still couldn't get it right? He still messed it up. And then he got really cocky, and he decided to pretend to be a graduate of the University of Michigan.
Yeah, but that fits in. Remember when he said that he could be really successful going to the University of Michigan. Now, remember, I went to Ohio State, so this is very hard for me to say. But that going to the University of Michigan shows that you are a smart person. It's hard to get in there. It's a great school. So having that, pretending to be a graduate of University of Michigan, burnished his image, made him look like this smart, accomplished guy. And he was from Michigan. And growing up, he loved University of Michigan. And so it wasn't hard to pull that off.
Right, because he's mixing truth and lies together, right?
Well, that's what all good liars do. There's always something. We find that all the time.
What do you think Jamie saw in Bryan Stewart?
Well, if we're going to be impartial, I think there's a quirkiness, a kind of a charming personality in a quirky way with Bryan. I think that she was lonely. She didn't have family or friends in Arizona, and so he provided companionship. And he, he's kind of fun to be with. She had a tough relationship with her parents. They wanted her to be a doctor, and she didn't live up to that. So I think she felt she disappointed them. So she wasn't as close with her parents. So here she is on her own. And, you've got this guy who went to University of Michigan. That's what he says. So she thinks she has something in common. And, they're cheering together during all the games. It makes me sad to even think about it.
So sad. Yeah, we called this hour The Stranger Beside Me, and it really was. He was the stranger beside her. So by the time Jamie disappeared, she and Bryan were so isolated from just about everyone that it took months for anyone to even notice that she was gone. Bryan and Jamie dated for a little over 2 years, and Bryan says that sometime in the summer of 2008, Jamie let him move into her house.
In an email, Jamie described you as her trophy boyfriend, and she was the one who was spending all the money. Did that bother you?
No, because I never knew that she said that.
Did she pay most of the bills?
Most of the big ones, yeah.
She bought 2 cars.
Right.
And the other car you drove.
Right. She bought a truck, an SUV.
So she made a lot more money than you did.
Sure. So.
Was that hard? You were pretty dependent on her financially. Was that tough?
No, I didn't really feel that way. I just felt like it was definitely easier to live with her. And it was easier that way because we still looked upon our future as being together. We were going to get married.
Do you think they were going to get married?
No. When he said it was easier living with her, that's what he meant.
Right.
He was having all his bills paid and he could do whatever he wanted.
So in August 2009, Jamie lost her job. The real estate market crashed. The financial crisis hit her hard. What do you think was going on in that relationship at that point?
Well, we don't know, but we know that she was supporting him. I doubt if he was emotionally supportive for her going through something like this. And her joblessness went on for a while, which must have been very difficult for a woman who was used to succeeding and making a lot of money and doing well. She didn't tell her friends, much about how she felt about what was going on. And she was actually out of work for months. She was applying for jobs all over the country, New Jersey, Florida, Denver, Colorado. And eventually she did get a job in Arizona in medical sales.
But on March 17th, 2010, it was her 3rd day on the job. Bryan claims that he was at Jamie's house when she got home from work.
I just remember that she'd come home. She was in scrubs, threw her hands up in the air, totally exasperated. And so it's like, you seem aggravated. What's going on? And she's just like, I'm not going back there. It was absolutely crazy.
And she's talking about her new job.
Yeah. And I'm like, wow, okay, well, what happened? What's going on? And she's like, well, it was, I get there and she's like, I just kind of sort of had a bad feeling.
That totally contradicts the friend who helped her get that job, who reported she was excited about the job. She finally had a job. Bryan, Rick, whatever you want to call him, also said something like, well, there was a creepy guy at the job and she wanted to get away from him. I don't believe either one of those.
So he was talking in circles, and you kept trying to bring him back to exactly what happened that night. Tell me what happened that night. And I love this next moment because you were starting to get so frustrated with him, you accidentally or not, called him by his real name.
Well, remember, that was one of the conditions, that I had to call him Bryan.
Right.
So.
He got a little annoyed. Let's listen to this.
What happened that night, Rick? Bryan? What happened that night?
That was when she came in and asked me to take a week off from work. And I was like, well, when? And she's like, well, in the next day or two, next couple days. I can't do that. What are you talking about? What's going on? And she's like, we're going to go to Denver. We're going to get a house. I've got a job offer up there. It's time to go. I want to go. I want to get out of this state. Well, okay, this is awfully short notice, And then it was, I want to go to Denver. We need to go. We need to find a house, and we're going to get married. Well, now, wait a second. Now, you and I know the rules here, okay? I'm not getting married to you until I find out what the heck's going on between you and your dad.
This is where it really gets crazy. So he's taking two truths and using them to lie to you to your face.
Right. So, as we mentioned, she did have a complicated relationship with her parents. And so, and Bryan clearly knew about it and wanted to use that. And then, of course, he used a truth. When she was, as I had mentioned earlier, she was looking for jobs. She was looking in Denver, Colorado for a job and had hoped to get one, but she did not get that job.
I just can't get over how he just calmly sits there and makes up these stories to your face. I mean, he had already done it on the witness stand too, right?
Right, but also it was his entire life. He had lied his entire life. That was the one thing we always heard about him. He's a liar. And sometimes people, they think, particularly women, she'll believe me. And his face never changed. Whether he was telling the truth or not, his face is the same.
Well, that's a good point, because I felt like he was looking at me as a woman, like a dumb woman every time. And so I just kind of let him believe that about me. I was a very good listener. He never asked me a single question whenever I talked to him. It was always him running his stories by me. And I just listened.
He probably was trying to figure out what seemed to stick and what didn't.
Definitely, yes.
What would work? What seemed to really resonate with you?
Yeah. Can I take a minute to tell you, I don't know if you remember the story, but I was with him once on one of our visits, and I had said to them, please don't leave me in the room with him for 4 hours again. I said, just give me 2 hours and then come knock on the door. And I always had to have a guard with me, right? So this guard kept he was so bored listening to this guy go on and on. He kept leaning out the door to see if they were coming to save us. And at one point he stepped out and the door smacked shut behind him. And without missing a beat, Rick says, quick, take off your clothes and get on the table. And I laughed and I said, oh, come on. But that's how he was treating me.
That is the creepiest. I remember this now, but that is one of the creepiest stories. That's what you don't want to happen.
Right?
Oh.
It was so bizarre. Anyway, after a little over 2 years, he says it was a drama-free breakup. I mean, come on. She was leaving and he was taking his things and going, and he says they even slept in the same bed, and he left the next morning for work. Jamie was missing for nearly 2.5 months, and no one even noticed.
I think her friend said the same thing, that it did take a while, but then people started noticing that she was not posting or emailing anybody. So, it's a little bit like telephone. Has anybody heard from Jamie? Has anybody heard from Jamie? And so he's realizing that people are going to start looking at him as well. So he wants to look like another concerned person. Where's Jamie? And so he calls someone and says, look, I'm worried about her. And the other thing I think really plays a part in this is so sad. We heard this over and over again from her friends. You don't know somebody who's going to disappear like this. So it was hard for people to believe that her boyfriend would do away with her.
Right.
They just didn't believe it. That doesn't happen to people you know, is what we hear all the time on 48 Hours. And we really heard it with this case.
That's so true, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that as soon as the police, they started looking because people reported him missing. Her parents reported her missing, and they do track him down, and he's driving her car. And even they thought he was a little odd. So that's the reason why they wanted to check him out.
Police arrested him on a warrant for driving on a suspended license and took him in for questioning. And they held him on charges of forgery and identity theft until they could make a case for murder. When they asked him where Jamie was, this is what he told detectives.
So Thursday morning, I'm up at 2:30, take my shower, eat breakfast, and I'm out the door by 3:45. That's the last I saw of her.
Okay.
I got home around noon. There were 2 of the big suitcases missing. There was a carry-on missing. And she was gone.
Detectives searched Jamie's home, and her suitcases were still there. The car that she drove was also there, and so was her passport, but her wallet and credit cards and driver's license were missing. Then, with Bryan in custody, they got a warrant to search his apartment and found some really alarming evidence.
What I probably will never forget the rest of my life, because it's so disturbing, is when they went to the apartment he had rented right before, quote unquote, she disappeared. They found her wallet, and several of her credit cards were on the desk. And what was saddest to me was in an envelope, they found all these little cut up pieces of what turned out to be her driver's license.
Right.
And, her cell phone was also at his apartment. But as usual, Bryan is not fazed by this very damaging evidence. And he had an explanation for all of this. And I don't think anyone listening is going to believe it, but this is what he claimed.
She's still alive. So all this hubbub is a lot of horse crap.
What do you mean she's still alive? You're saying Jamie is still alive?
She's still alive.
How do you know?
Because until I'm proven differently, I know what her plans were. I know what she wanted to do. I know what she wanted to accomplish.
Which was?
Leave Arizona and get away from her dad.
Are you saying that you helped Jamie change her identity?
Yeah, I showed her how to do it.
So are you saying that you made up the idea that she had a job in Denver?
No,
He's now totally changing his story. First, he's telling you Jamie went to Denver, and now she didn't go to Denver. She just got up and disappeared to get away from her dad, who, as we mentioned before, she did have a complicated relationship with. What is he trying to say?
He's now saying that she was so tired of her own life that she asked him how he did it. And what's so hard about that is this was, again, this very accomplished woman and very buttoned down. And would she do something like that?
Right. Do you think she knew that he had changed his identity? Do you think she found out? No.
Well, she might have found out.
Right.
Something happened that night.
Right.
So maybe she did find out. Maybe during that time off, she was looking into him without a job. When I say time off, when she wasn't working, she looked into him. Something happened on March 17th.
So, okay, so he's changing his story now. Did she go to Denver? Did she disappear? This is what you asked him.
So did she have that job? Did she take a job in Denver or not?
I don't know.
So
I
what
showed her the
name
book.
is she? What name is she operating
Oh, I
under?
don't know that. So.
What do you mean? If you helped her, wouldn't you know what name?
Well, you have to understand, I helped her from a general standpoint. I showed her how I did it. Okay? Now, there were books. Okay? She read the books. She knew they were there. She had all of that. Plus, she had me. And that was the thing that I told her is that the real key is you got to have money. You got to have cash. Okay?
She didn't have any cash.
Oh, she had, well...
She didn't have any cash. Bryan, all her money, she left behind all her credit cards. She left behind all her accounts.
Sure.
You know, I mean, he wasn't expecting that I would know that she had money still sitting in her account. She simply disappeared. And I think what's really important to know is that she didn't have a reason to disappear.
Right.
She didn't have a reason. She had a brand new job. She wasn't running from things. She didn't have ex-husbands or children she didn't want to pay child support for. There was no reason for her to want to change.
This next exchange kept me from dating online for many, many years, for a decade.
You used her credit cards to go on dating sites.
Mm-hmm.
That's nervy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty nervy.
And pretty insensitive, too, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, a little, because, well, let me explain.
You used her credit cards to go on dating sites to meet other women.
Well, you know what? Look, Jamie was leaving. Jamie had her own life to live.
So use your own money. Why did you use hers?
Well, I did. Okay? That was the whole point.
When you asked him what gave him the right to use Jamie's credit cards, he said he was doing it for her. Can you explain that rationale, please?
Well, I can't really explain it. I could tell you what his thoughts were. I mean, I was so offended by that. As a reporter and a woman, the idea that he would claim to me, here she disappeared, she left behind the credit cards, and that he used those credit cards to meet other people was so offensive. But what he claimed was she was still alive. I know nobody will believe me, but this is what he said, that she was still alive and he was giving her cash and leaving it at her house where she would come in the middle of the night, pick it up, and then disappear again. I mean, who's going to believe that? But he said it to me just like it was the most normal thing to say.
Yeah, it's super crazy. So this next exchange feels to me like the final car chase in a movie.
It seems to me that when you're preparing for trial, if you could have found her, you would have found her with your lawyers. That's all you would have needed, and you wouldn't have gone on trial at all.
Well, now, okay, just because I could have sent her an email, just because I could have called a number, doesn't mean that she wouldn't have switched it out at that point, okay? Because...
But you didn't even try.
How am I supposed to try?
She's gone. No one sees her again March 18th. Jamie's dead, isn't she?
It's not hard to get new ID.
You said it takes time. You yourself said that, Bryan.
No, I said it takes time.
She didn't have that time.
I said it takes time to create a new persona. To get the ID is nothing.
Right. She didn't have the time to create the new persona.
Yes, she did. Jamie took $100,000 and what could be 3 different identifications, and she left the state of Arizona.
Do you remember how you felt in that moment?
Well, it's just like, where do you go with that? This is a man. I mean, what was really sad? I mean, what I was trying to make a point there, he's saying she's still alive, and he's on trial for her murder. And if she was still alive, he would have reached out to her and said, save me, prove, please, that I didn't kill you. I mean, what you have to be thinking as you're sitting there when you're talking is, he killed her, and he has the nerve to sit there and say she's still alive. It's not only old, it's just incredibly sad and aggravating.
Yes, very. He was called to the witness stand, as Rick Valentini, a.k.a. Bryan Stewart, but his lawyer called him Bryan. I mean, so crazy. She walked him through his name change and the rest of his story gently, and then the prosecutor, Juan Martinez, took over and pounded him. I mean, I remember the judge basically outside of the view of the jury saying, we get it, you know? So just after he was convicted and prior to his sentencing, he agreed to an interview with you. What do you recall about that day?
Well, actually, you made me remember all of this. You know, we had amazing access. I've never had that kind of access inside a prison. The day that we were with him, his lawyer came to see him and was shocked to hear that we were there because he had not told her he was talking to the press. That is a nightmare for a defense attorney. I mean, he lied to everyone, including his own lawyer. Ugh.
All along, you've told a lot of different stories.
Sure.
And they're contradictory stories.
Sure.
I mean, you admit you've lied about things.
Sure.
Why should somebody believe you now?
I'm not asking for people to believe me. I'm not, to me, I don't really care what people think.
I think he does care, but so have you heard it all from him?
No, which is, oddly upsetting. Like, they go away and they never call me again. But the last conversation I had with him, I was at the airport on my way home after all of, after the interview. And he started asking me questions which he had never done. Like, what's your last name? And, oh, are you Jewish? And it was so bizarre. Like, all of a sudden he's interested in me, which was sort of creepy, right? And I remember calling my best friend at the time and saying, I actually feel bad for this knucklehead. Like, he just doesn't get it. He can't get out of his own way. And she said to me, save that for someone who deserves it.
I agree with her. So I do think that because you spent so much time with him, that you saw him more as this guy who could have had a great future and threw it away. Yeah. He hurt himself. I saw him as, I couldn't get past. He was a con man who killed this young woman who did have a great future and was just looking for how she could succeed and impress her parents. And he took that all away from all of them. Her parents were wonderful, sweet people who, blamed themselves in part. They felt they might have been too tough on her, and they never got a chance to say that to her.
Yeah, they were very sweet. And I remember her mother saying she carries her receiving blanket with her for the day that they find her. It was so sad.
And that turned out to be very important years later.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know, 6.5 years later, I was in Italy on vacation and my phone rang and it was one of the detectives. And when a detective calls me, I always answer. And he said, you're not going to believe this, but they found Jamie's body.
And they did. It still makes me sad because you and I both talked to him afterwards. And what struck me was how moved they were. Yeah. And happy that they were able to finally bring her home to her parents. And so, their parents will continue grieving, but at least there's like a bit of closure to that. They know he murdered her. They know where he put her, and they could bury her themselves.
Yeah, and that's always so important to these families, right? They just want their people home. They want to know where they are, right?
They want to be able to grieve properly because sometimes when you don't know, and I've done too many of these stories where the person has not been found, that really kind of gets in the way of the parents grieving properly because there's so much guilt. I should be looking for. I didn't do enough to look for. And so finally these parents can say, she's at rest and we can mourn her properly.
So, Erin, ultimately, what's the lesson of this case? What should our audience take away from this?
Well, sadly, I think it is that I keep thinking of her friends. Oh, this doesn't happen to us. And yet it does. Time and time again, sadly, at 48 hours. If you're worried, you're seeing signs of a problem in a relationship, you tell your friend or your sister or your, whoever you know. And And when someone doesn't respond, disappear for a while, you don't let that go. You don't just assume they're fine. This is a reminder to all of us to stay in touch with the people we care about.
It's so true. So true. Well, thank you again for joining me for this podcast. Again, it was my first hour for 48 hours and now my first podcast for 48 hours. And it's such a pleasure having you.
But you know what? There'll be plenty of conversations with killers.
On the next episode of Killer Conversation, Peter Van Sant joins me again, this time to discuss two infamous teenage killers who made headlines around the world but only granted interviews to Peter for 48 hours.
Atif, did you and Sebastian Burns meticulously plan the murder of your family?
Absolutely not.
48 Hours Killer Conversation is hosted and produced by me, Judy Rybak. Our story editor is Maura Walls. Alan Pang oversees recording, mixing, and sound design, fact-checking, and additional production support from Rebecca LaFlamme, and special thanks to 48 Hours executive producer Judy Tygard and Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus. Follow and listen to Killer Conversation on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. If you liked this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Tune in next Tuesday for an all-new episode of Killer Conversation. Follow Killer Conversation on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.